I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Welcome to this podcast of the People's Pharmacy.
You can find previous podcasts and more information on a range of health topics at peoplespharmacy.com. Is the coronavirus pandemic stressing you out? If so, you've got lots of company. How are children coping with the isolation? This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
For some youngsters, classes on Zoom are super challenging. Their parents also have to try to help the kids manage remote learning while they themselves work from home.
The UK has just approved a vaccine for COVID-19, and the US is not far behind. This is a hopeful development, but it's still likely to be months before ordinary people can be immunized.
As a result, this holiday season will be different from all others. How are families managing?
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, how COVID-19 is affecting our mental health.
In the People's Pharmacy Health Headlines, studies of antibodies in blood samples indicate that SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, was circulating in the U.S. by mid-December 2019. Last week, we reported on an Italian study showing antibodies to the virus could be detected in samples taken in September 2019 and stored for analysis. Blood samples in the U.S. study were collected by the Red Cross last year between December 13th and January 17th. In California, Oregon, and Washington, a number of samples from December tested positive for the antibodies. By early January, numerous samples from other states had antibodies, before any cases of infection were reported in those areas of the country. These results seem to show the virus was spreading in the world long before it was identified in China.
Now that both Pfizer and Moderna have requested emergency use authorization from the FDA, the question is who will get the first doses of these COVID-19 vaccines. An independent advisory committee has advised the CDC that healthcare workers at high risk and vulnerable people in nursing homes or long-term care facilities should be first in line. States have autonomy in deciding how to allocate vaccine distribution, but it's likely that the CDC recommendations will be followed. Once this first tier of vaccinations is complete early in 2021, it's expected that essential workers will be next in line. That includes police, firefighters, teachers, and people employed in public transportation. Older people and those with underlying health conditions will be close behind.
What kinds of side effects can people anticipate from the vaccines? The COVID vaccine czar, Dr. Monsef Slaoui, suggests that about 10 to 15% of recipients will experience significantly noticeable reactions. The immune system response to the vaccination can trigger fever, chills, headaches, and muscle aches. Some people have injection site reactions that make the arm red and sore. The response may be apparent for more than a day, and during that time it might be difficult to work due to fatigue.
A new study of a very old vaccine called BCG may also protect against COVID-19. This vaccine has been available for more than a century to prevent tuberculosis. The FDA has also approved BCG as an immunotherapy to treat bladder cancer. In the new study, over 6,000 healthcare workers were tested for SARS-CoV-2 antibodies. They also provided information about prior vaccinations. People who had received a BCG vaccination were much less likely to have developed COVID-19. Several studies are now underway to determine if a BCG shot could protect people against SARS-CoV-2.
People who have low levels of vitamin D circulating in their bodies appear to be more vulnerable to COVID-19. In a small study in Brazil, hospitalized COVID patients were injected with 200,000 international units of vitamin D3, or placebo. That's a whopping dose. The COVID patients did not benefit from the extra amount of vitamin D. They were just as likely as the patients who got placebo to require intensive care or ventilator therapy. There was no difference in the proportion of patients who died from COVID-19.
Vitamin D circulates in the body as 25-hydroxyvitamin D, an inactive precursor of the active form, 1,25-hydroxyvitamin D. Most studies simply measure the precursor, but research at UCSD recently discovered that levels of the active vitamin are associated with gut microbes. The investigation included nearly 600 older men. Both stool and blood samples were analyzed, revealing that men with higher levels of the active hormone had more diverse gut microbiota. In particular, they had higher levels of 12 types of bacteria that produce butyrate, a fatty acid with gut benefits. Surprisingly, there were no correlations between levels of vitamin D precursor and levels of the active vitamin. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. How are you coping in the midst of this pandemic? A lot of people are feeling overwhelmed, and their children may also be feeling stressed out. How are parents managing their own issues and helping their children as well?
To help us better deal with the emotional challenge of COVID-19, we're talking today with Dr. Robin Gurwitch. She's a professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at the Duke University Medical Center and the Center for Child and Family Health. She's an expert in understanding and supporting children in the aftermath of trauma and disasters and has been an active member of the National Child Traumatic Stress Network since it began in 2001.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Robin Gurwitch.
Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to talking with you today.
Dr. Gurwitch, your work has focused on the impact of trauma on kids. And I know that during the 9/11 horror, children all across the country watched those events unfold, and it probably had a pretty strong impact. Now, kids are experiencing trauma directly as a result of the pandemic. I'm wondering if you are seeing some of those similarities from 9/11 today as children are reacting and responding to what they're seeing and hearing.
Well, that's a really great question to think about the events, whether it's 9/11 or Katrina or school shootings. There's been so many that children and teens have been exposed to. I think what is unique about COVID is that we think about it as a public health crisis, a public health emergency. And for some children and families, it may be traumatic. For others, it may have extreme stress reactions, but wouldn't rise to the level of trauma. Regardless, children and families are feeling quite a bit of mental health distress. And what makes this public health crisis so different is there is no one in the world that has not been directly affected. And we don't know how long it's going to last. We don't know how bad it's going to be. We can't see it, so we don't even know who has it and who doesn't. So all of those variables are certainly increasing child anxiety, risk for depression, risk for PTSD if they've had some traumatic experience, such as death of a loved one or having housing insecurity increase or secondary adversities like financial stressors and strains. And certainly not being able to be with their friends and loved ones is an extreme stress for kids.
How would parents know how well or poorly their children are coping, and who do they turn to for help if they decide that their children need help?
Sure. So I will tell you that in looking at all the research that's come out, About 30 to 40% of parents are saying, hey, look, I'm worried about my child's emotional distress. We know that in recent surveys, almost 70% of families are saying this school year has been extremely stressful for us and for our kids. So I think what we look at, there's 2 points. One, recognize that parents and caregivers are the best predictors. How well they're doing is the best predictors of how well their kids are going to do, one of the best. And we know that all of us, adults and children alike, are distressed. So we need to think about, how are we managing, what message are we giving our children to take a look at how our kids are doing. With our children, you can expect things like problems with attention, problems with focus and concentration, problems with irritability, problems with new learning, which makes virtual school even more challenging. We see sleep issues. We may see problems in behavior. And so, if these problems are interfering with a child's day to day functioning, and families are worried, the good news is there are resources out there. They are available to children of all ages, all the way through the teens. And so families can reach out, even if they're not sure, reaching out and say, hey, this is what's going on. And you may have that's pretty typical and that's normal. And here are some things you can do. Or they may say, gosh, that may need more of a specific mental health intervention.
Where should they reach?
So they can reach out, families can reach out to their local mental health associations, their state psychological association. They can reach out. There are many hotlines that they can call. There's a national hotline through SAMHSA. There are suicide hotlines, even if families, with teens are worried, my child seems so depressed, my teen seems so worried. So all of those are there, but I would start, even your pediatrician will have resources of, here are mental health outreach that you can check in and see. I'm part of the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, and we have put up many, many resources for families. They can look at those. They're all free, and they can give some guidance of, here are some things you can do. Here are some places you can check for help.
And now in this age of COVID-19, there's a lot of telemedicine. So people can have Zoom therapy. They can use their cell phone. So there are ways that people can really get the help that they need. But I'd like to go back to something you said, and that is that one of the predictors of how well children are doing is how well their parents are doing. And you've also gone on to suggest, and I think this is an apt metaphor, that we're all juggling a lot of stuff, that we got a lot of balls up in the air right now. And it's like somebody has thrown a chainsaw into the mix, and we're trying to deal with that as well. How do parents cope with all of the stuff that's going on with themselves as well as their children?
Yes, the juggling act is quite more difficult, and I can't turn in my parenting manual to chapter 5 on helping my children through a pandemic. And so we're doing the best we can. And I think that's important for parents and caregivers to recognize. Some days will be better than others, and I can only do as much as I can do. With that being said, I think there are things that we know can reduce parents and caregivers, reduce children and teens' worries and anxieties. One, think about, what are they doing to help their children and teens stay connected, whether it's through some creative Zoom experiences, whether it is social distance get-togethers, whether it is drive-by honk and waves, whether it is going out and creating sidewalk art so they feel connected with other neighbors. There are many ways for children to continue to stay connected. We do need to acknowledge that this isn't fair. My daddy used to say, life isn't always fair. I'll needlepoint that on a pillow for you. But this is truly one of those situations that isn't fair. We need to validate the disappointments and the angers and the frustration and the sadness that our children may be experiencing. I think.
What about routine?
Yes, thank you. You read my mind there. Routine is one of the things we can do. So children do better if they have a routine. So plan on when do they get up? When are they doing their schoolwork? When is their after school relaxation and decompression? When is exercise built in? When is free time and calm time built in? So certainly it doesn't have to be at 9 o'clock. You need to be doing this at 9:30. You need to be doing that. But do you have a routine? Do you have a schedule? Children do better with routines and schedules. I think children do better when we think about the media. You mentioned how much children are seeing. For really young children, they shouldn't be watching this coverage. For children as they get older, it should be somewhat limited, but don't assume they're not talking about it. Don't assume they're not watching it, particularly as they get into middle school and high school. But this is a time where you can watch a little with them, then turn it off, take a break, talk about what did you think about that story? What did you think about it? I think it's important for us as adults to talk to our children and teenagers about this is what our family is doing to stay safe and well. This is what our community is doing to stay safe and well. And I know it's confusing because it can change tomorrow, but I will let you know anytime that I hear there's going to be a change, I'll share that with you and we'll figure out how to do this together. So it's not that it doesn't have challenges and extreme stress. But if you can think about how we're going to get through this together, what are we going to do? What are action steps that we can do? And that includes things like helping children recognize what they've done in the past to cope with challenges and remind them they can use some of the same ideas. Helping them think through, how do you relax? How can I do some calming activities? And also, interestingly enough, when we help others, even if we're experiencing the same distress, we do better. So whether it's bringing up your elderly neighbor's trash cans, whether it is if they're old enough and it's safe to volunteer at a food bank, or whether it is going through and collecting gently used clothes and toys to be able to donate. When we find a way to help someone else, even if we're stressed, we do better.
You're listening to Dr. Robin Gurwitch. She's a professor in psychiatry and behavioral sciences in the Duke University Medical Center and the Center for Child and Family Health. Dr. Gurwitch has been involved in direct services, research, consultation, and material development following national and international disasters and terrorist events.
After the break, we'll learn about the long-term consequences of trauma on children.
How can families care for their children's mental health at this challenging time?
This holiday season won't be like any others. How can families navigate the hurdles?
How has the pandemic revealed ways we're not taking care of ourselves as a society?
How can people cope with depression in the middle of a pandemic?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. This podcast is brought to you by the Verrazana Health Club. This comprehensive home testing service enables you to track crucial health markers of gut health, inflammation, metabolism, hormones, thyroid function, and many other organ systems. Regular testing can help detect health imbalances before they lead to sickness. Online at Verrazana, verisana.com/health-club. Get 50% off the first month with the discount code PEOPLE50.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by CocoVia Memory Plus, a cocoflavanol supplement backed by 4 clinical studies that show significant improvement in 3 different aspects of memory. More information at cocovia.com.
Also by Verizana, an analytical laboratory providing home health tests for hormones, gut health, and the microbiome, now with an annual health club plan. Online at verisana.com/health-club.
How will children remember this scary time? Childhood experiences can have a lasting impact.
Our guest is Dr. Robin Gurwitch. She's a professor in psychiatry and behavioral sciences in the Duke University Medical Center and the Center for Child and Family Health.
Dr. Gurwitch, I wonder if you could talk for a bit about the long-term consequences of trauma on children. And my parents grew up during the last flu pandemic, the 1918 flu pandemic, and also during the 1930s, the Depression, and it left lasting scars for them. I had polio when I was 2.5 years of age, and it has left lasting scars, being in the hospital, being separated from my parents, kind of a post-traumatic stress condition. I'm wondering how parents should think about this for their younger children and even their teens after we have hopefully soon, rather than later, recovered from this pandemic.
Sure. I think when we consider children who've experienced trauma, the good news is we have come a long way in our understanding about children's mental health, and even further in terms of how we understand children exposed to traumas or extreme stressors. What we know is that most kids, with the supports we know are important, do well. Most children will actually do well if we have those supports, caregivers and parents, good role models, patience and attention, helping them with coping strategies, recognizing when they do well. For that small group that is struggling, fortunately, we have come a long way in understanding what works for mental health treatment for young children all the way through adolescence than probably when you were a child. Because I will tell you that until the 80s, we didn't think much about it or didn't really understand it. And so it's pretty new that we've actually developed interventions, strategies, and understanding of what's going on. And what we recognize is for families that have children that already had some mental health challenges before, those children are going to have a more difficult time. So, I absolutely love Kelly Clarkson. She's fantastic. But what doesn't kill you when you're talking about trauma doesn't make you stronger. The more of those traumatic events or high stress situations that we pile on to children and teens, the more at risk they are. So in talking with families, the biggest worry they have is, how can I make sure my child's going to be okay? That's one of the biggest worries, because they are truly trying to balance so much. Their own work as well as the well-being, not only the physical well-being, but the emotional well-being of their children. And so these are children that are already being seen for example, I do a lot of work with very young children with pretty significant behavior problems due to many things, including trauma. And the question comes up all the time with, how can I balance this with COVID? How do I balance this with COVID plus the social justice movements? How do I balance this? So we keep adding more chainsaws. And families are really struggling. And that's what I'm hearing from families. That's what those that I consult with in therapy services are hearing from their families.
Can you give us some examples, please, at least one, Dr. Gurwitch, about what challenges a family is facing and how perhaps you have been able to help them help their child?
So, sure. And I think that this is certainly one family, but it's the same thing that I've been hearing from so many. They're coming in and they're saying, what I hear is, I am worried about this particular family. I'm worried about my own health, and my child is so little, she can't understand how come we can't go out and play. How come we can't have friends over? And they have been making great strides in therapy services. They're reporting great success there, but they've seen an uptick in problems that they thought had gone away. So, helping families understand that COVID presents a new stressor, and not being surprised that you may see an uptick in challenges that you were working with that you thought, oh my gosh, I'm making progress. So we have really spent time with families having discussions about what has COVID been like for your families, giving them the space to talk about it, and putting into practice, what have you learned so far in therapy that you're using with your children? And can you double down on that right now? Even more important for those ideas that we know are building safe and secure attachments. So, for example, we teach our families, pay attention when kids are doing something well. So if they're sharing and they're 4 years old and they're sharing and that's something new and you've worked with that and they're gotten better, make sure you point it out. Thank you for sharing. I really love the way you're sharing with your sister or your brother. And now they may go back to being, I want it, it's mine. We need to look and find those opportunities when they're taking an opportunity to share and give it that, what we call a label praise.
That does sound like a good approach. Do you have any other recommendations for families on how to care for children during this very, very challenging time?
This will be easier said than done, but adults need to take a breath. They need to take a breath and be kind to themselves too, and recognize that a little bit of patience is going to be extremely important. When the child forgets to feed the dog and that's been their chore forever, it's not that they're trying to press a button. It's that I truly forgot because I'm so stressed. So take a beat and let them know that the dog needs to be fed. And when they do, thank you so much for remembering your chore and feeding the dog. I think having time that you sit down and discuss, what do you think about all this that's going on? I know you want to be in whatever grade with your friends. What's this been like for you? What are your worries? And giving them that space, not once, but circling back around on a regular basis is so, so important to how well children are going to do.
Dr. Gerwich, the holidays are approaching and everything has been disrupted. And I'm just wondering, do you have any tips on, how we can deal with a holiday that is not like any other holiday we've experienced in recent memory?
You hit the nail on the head. These holidays are not going to be holidays as usual, whether it is whatever holiday you celebrate. And so one of the things we can think about is, given these changes, what's maybe a new tradition that we can have? What's one way that we continue to stay connected, even in a time where everybody's not coming together? I think for families that have experienced grief and loss, is there a way this holiday season that families can consider ways to honor that person, building that in? I think particularly for families that have been dealt COVID plus a fire, a hurricane, a tornado, that they've experienced other disasters on top of COVID. How are they going to think about their traditions, and how can they come up with new ones? And one of the things to consider is, as part of the holiday tradition that you may start about, is thinking about what we call a grat chat or a thankfulness, where children can write cards or just as a group or via Zoom when they're connected to think about what are some of the things that they are thankful for. What are the things they're grateful for? And it may be just that we're together, even if it's in a weird way. Maybe it is that our family is fortunate to be well. So I think that's important. I think this is a perfect time to think about how do we help our children help others, to think about this holiday season as an opportunity to talk about and show what are the values and beliefs given this really stressful time that we want our children to take and to think about, to set goals for the holidays and to celebrate even the little ones that are achieved. But recognize that these holidays are going to be a little bit harder. Think about family that may be alone. How are you going to reach out? How do we reach out to someone that normally would come in, fly in, and now they're not? How do we make sure that loneliness is addressed? So this is going to be a holiday like no other. But at the end of the holiday season, are we helping our children come out of this as kinder, as more thankful, as more appreciative, as better recognizing what others do in our world, and are we being the best that we can be?
Dr. Robin Gerwich, thank you very much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to Dr. Robin Gerwich. She's a professor in psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Duke University Medical Center and the Center for Child and Family Health. She's been an active member of the National Child Traumatic Stress Network since it began in 2001.
We turn now to Dr. Timothy Strauman. He's a professor of psychology and neuroscience at Duke University. He studies how people pursue goals in the face of inevitable challenges. He also studies how treatments for depression work.
Dr. Timothy Strauman, welcome to the People's Pharmacy.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Strauman, when it comes to the pandemic, you have said that it has highlighted ways in which we are not taking care of ourselves as a society. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think it's become apparent that there are a lot of everyday stressors that we have sort of rolled with and tried our best not to allow us to get down. And one of the things that the pandemic has done is brought those things into relief. So people's lives have already been pretty stressful. And the pandemic's effect have been to take things that we were sort of counting on and things that we felt like we had managed and mastered, and it took all that certainty away. So, now we're not sleeping as well. We all have many more things to do than we used to do, and actually less time to do it. Many of us have more responsibilities than we had in the past, and they seem to be responsibilities that actually conflict with each other. I think in those respects, we are under tremendous pressure, not just as individuals, but really as communities and as a society.
What do you see as the main mental health consequences of this incredible year of 2020?
I think it's two things. One is in any moment, in any acute situation, it's stress and anxiety. Our brains get ramped up. They respond as if there's an emergency. Adrenaline starts pumping. Our attention gets focused on what we think is most important. And that's adaptive for a short period of time, but it's not adaptive if it's happening again and again and again. The long-term consequence of that. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it seems as though this is going on and on.
It is. And the long-term consequence of that continuous chronic stress is vulnerability to depression. People get hopeless. They start thinking, what's the use? Nothing I do is going to bring a positive outcome. The things that I used to enjoy are not fun. The people that I would love to see, I can't see. The positive reinforcement that we all count on in our lives has gotten harder and harder to get. So in the short term, it's anxiety and stress. In the longer term, it's depression.
Well, that's especially true if we've lost someone we love or even just an acquaintance. So, how do we cope with depression in the middle of a pandemic?
This is again where I think rather than focusing on us as individuals, it's really important for us to focus on each of us as part of a community. We all have needs that are not being met right now, and some of us very acutely. We're all being asked to do more than we were being asked to do before. It's important as individuals to say, what's under my control today? Is it sleep? Can I make myself sleep better? Is it making sure I'm eating properly? Is it checking in with the people that I'm worrying about and the people that I love? And then the second part of that is how can I also extend myself to other people who are going through the same thing? Because one of the things that's most remarkable about human resilience is that when we're focused on other people's needs, somehow that reduces our own stress level, makes us feel like we have meaningful lives, and is actually reinforcing. So, in general, when I work with people, I'm talking about those two things. One is really self care, and the other is reaching out and maintaining existing connections and building new ones.
How can somebody tell the difference between being depressed and just being totally bummed out because everything has gone the wrong direction?
Yeah, that's a great question. One analogy that I think can be useful is, you know, we're all bummed out right now. No one is happy with this set of circumstances. But generally speaking, if you're not depressed, a joke is still funny. Food still tastes good. A smiling face, if assuming you can see it through the mask, still helps you light up inside. Depression is like a heating system where the thermostat has been set at a much lower level. And suddenly it's just not responding anymore. The things in your environment that would elicit excitement and joy and anticipation and energy, they're just not working anymore. And it's usually a qualitative difference. It's usually something that, even if it happens suddenly, you wake up one day and you realize, I can't get out of bed. I have no motivation to do anything. I feel like no matter what I do, it's not going to be helpful. I feel hopeless. I feel sad. So it's whether it happens abruptly or slowly, people get to a point where it feels very different than normal everyday stress.
You're listening to Dr. Timothy Strauman, professor of psychology and neuroscience at Duke University. He studies the psychological and neurobiological aspects of self-regulation and how problems in self-regulation can lead to disorders such as depression. He also studies how treatments for depression work.
After the break, find out what the options are for someone who finds they're feeling depressed.
How can we deal with burnout?
We need to find ways to let frontline workers know that they're appreciated.
How can we balance working from home and taking care of ourselves?
What's the best way to deal with unpredictability over the next several months and years?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy podcast is supported in part by CocoVia Memory Plus. CocoVia cocoflavanols support both cardiovascular health and cognitive function by promoting healthy blood flow, transporting oxygen and nutrients to vital organs and muscles, including your heart and brain.
CocoVia Memory Plus has 750 milligrams of cocoflavanols, the plant-based nutrients from fresh cocoa that have been proven to help boost memory.
CocoVia Memory Plus is backed by 4 clinical trials that demonstrate improvement in 3 different aspects of memory: long-term memory, spatial memory, and word recall. The studies show improved brain function in just 8 weeks.
You can try the benefits of CocoVia Memory Plus with a 25% discount off your first month. Use the code PEOPLES25. To get the full benefits, take it daily for 8 weeks. CocoVia is offering People's Pharmacy podcast listeners a 10% discount on subscriptions. That code is PEOPLES10. Learn more at cocovia.com. Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by CocoVia Memory Plus, a supplement with 750 milligrams of cocoflavanols, the plant-based nutrients with fresh cocoa that help support memory. More information at cocovia.com.
Also by Verizana, an analytical laboratory providing home health tests for hormones, gut health, and the microbiome, now with an annual health club plan. Online at verisana.com/health-club.
Today we are talking about the psychological impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. How is your mental health? What tactics can you employ to take care of yourself during these stressful times?
We're talking with Dr. Timothy Strauman, a professor of psychology and neuroscience at Duke University. He studies the psychological and neurobiological aspects of self-regulation and how problems in self-regulation can lead to disorders such as depression. He also studies how treatments for depression work.
So if somebody is falling into that downward spiral that you're describing, what can they do? They can't maybe go visit friends. They maybe can't visit their therapist. What other options are there?
The first thing you need to do is make contact with a health professional that you trust, just to make the contact. That in and of itself is remoralizing. It gives people a sense of, okay, we know what the problem is here. We know what to do about this problem. This is not hopeless. It's not a mystery. Millions of people have gone through it. Lots of people are going through it now. So that's step one. Step two is, if you have a therapist and if you already have some options for how to deal with stress, is to rededicate yourself to those things slowly. It's not going to happen overnight. Things are not suddenly going to be fun again. And one of the challenges in working with depression behaviorally is that we say to people, you're going to have to do this first in order to make it reinforcing again. You're basically retraining your brain to say, oh yeah, I used to really enjoy this. And the first few times I do it, I may not enjoy it as much, but if I keep doing it, I'll be sort of, reinvigorating that engine and refiring the cylinders. And the third thing is reach out to people and let them know how you're feeling. Do not try to deal with it alone. Everybody's in this together. And when you have the support of other people, and it doesn't matter if it's virtual or in person, you just need to reach out to people who you know are going to care about you. And then at the same time, make sure you're caring about them and asking them how they're doing so you can be supporting each other. That, for us as primates even, is enormously important to our health.
Dr. Strauman, there's a lot of burnout. Of course, people who are having to deal with the pandemic, healthcare workers, for example, it's totally understandable that they would be burning out after so many months of giving 185%. How can we deal with burnout? Because people in other professions also are feeling burned out. Teachers and many other people have had to deal with situations that just are so trying that they're stressed beyond belief.
From the point of view of the folks who are bearing the brunt of this pandemic, it's very important to go back to basics. Why am I doing what I do? Why is this meaningful to me? Where can I get the support that I need and the reassurance that I need, that even though it seems like my world is falling apart and I have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow, that my work is valuable and it's meaningful and it's making a difference in other people's lives. It's very important to go back to basics if you're vulnerable to burnout, especially in these helping professions. Not to mention people who are the folks who help us in the checkout line, or people who are doing the everyday tasks that as a community we probably have been taking for granted for a long time. As somebody who can support those folks, every interaction is an opportunity to say thank you. Every interaction is an opportunity to stop and say, wow, there are a lot of people in this community who I've actually depended on for a long time. And one of the things I can do today, I can't take the stress out of their lives, but I can tell them how much I appreciate them. That kind of person-to-person contact is something that can really make a difference in someone's life. And my experience is it often comes along at exactly the time when somebody needs it most. Many of us are sort of very intuitive when we're interacting with other people, and we can see when a kind word and a smile, mask notwithstanding, really makes a difference in somebody else's life. And even just to be cognizant of that, who out there today can I connect with who maybe that connection is going to be a really powerful experience for them, even though to me it feels like something very trivial.
Well, I'm really glad you mentioned supermarket workers because, there are people who are checking us out. There are people who are stocking the shelves. There are people who are putting things in the car for us or delivering to our front door. And it turns out the supermarkets are really a very dangerous place to work right now. And so any kindness that we can offer, it goes a long way. I don't think we appreciate how dangerous that is. We think, oh yeah, doctors have it hard, and indeed so do the nurses, and so does everyone else in healthcare. But there are a lot of other professions that are also being challenged, and that kind word can go a really long way.
Yeah. At the risk of sounding, like somebody who is unreasonably optimistic, I do believe that there is a lot that we as communities and as a society and as individuals are going to learn from this experience. I have a colleague who has talked about comparing it to the experiences in London and other cities in England during World War II. It's like people learned how resilient they actually were, and they learned how much they depended on each other and how much they needed each other. Now, I'm not saying there's any real historical comparison there, and I'm not a historian, but I do believe there is a real opportunity for us to learn things, and then to go back and say, okay, what are the long-term changes we need to make? If we're depending on people who are making minimum wage, how do we feel about that? If we're asking our healthcare providers to continuously put themselves at that level of risk, how do we feel about that? Right now we've got to get through it, but I think there are lessons we can learn that will make us better people and better communities and ultimately a better society. I really do believe that.
Dr. Strauman, you've said what we all know. It's hard to work from home. And it's hard to educate kids. It's hard to educate your own kids, especially if you're not an educator. And it's hard to provide childcare. These are all hard things, and many families are being asked to do them all at the same time. How can families balance all of these incredibly difficult chores?
Well, speaking as someone whose kids are grown, my hat is often, I have total admiration for people who are having to do that right now with younger children. We try to sort of bring it back to basics. The first one is breathe, stop, breathe, slow things down. On a day-to-day basis, there often are very few things that are actually that you have to do in any particular moment. So it's good to sort of try to have a mindset of, I'm going to slow this day down to its essentials. I think a second thing is, I'm sure your other guests probably covered on this, is have these conversations in your family. Kids, here's what I need from you. Here's what I can do for you. Tell me what worries you. Tell me if there are things that feel out of control or things that don't feel right. We can solve those problems if we know what they are. And then get the kids to relax, get the kids to breathe, get them to, if possible, see what they're doing as an adventure. As, this is uncharted territory. We have no idea how this is going to go. But our family, we can handle this. We can make this work for us, whatever that family is. The communication will help, the breathing will help, and just the realization that there probably are a lot of things that are not essential right now. And if you boil the day down to the essentials, it will still be stressful, but maybe it won't be impossibly stressful.
Dr. Strauman, your research has focused on self-care and self-regulation. And, here at the People's Pharmacy, we have been promoting self-care for almost 40 years. I would be so grateful if you could give us some tips on self-care strategies, especially when it's really hard to go to a therapist or go to a friend's house or perhaps a clergy person, somebody who normally would be the way we might deal with depression or stresses in our lives, reaching out to others. Tell us a little bit about telemedicine, for example, and in particular, how you recommend people take care of themselves.
Sure. So a lot of our research has actually been looking at how people evaluate themselves. We all grow up with a set of expectations about, what does it mean to be a good person? What's the best that I can be as a person? What kind of person am I supposed to be? And those beliefs follow us through our lives, and they're enormously powerful. And of course, they're good, right? They make us who we are. They give us aspirations. They keep us on the straight and narrow. Often, though, what happens is that they lose their applicability over time, and we sort of end up carrying baggage with us about, at an earlier point in my life, it was really important to be X. And frankly, right at this point in my life, being X is totally irrelevant. And I'm still in the habit of thinking that's a really important thing for me. So just to go back to sort of our last comment, as a parent, we have enormous expectations of ourselves. And they're all good in the abstract, but at this moment, there probably are a bunch of them that it's safe to set aside because we can only have so much bandwidth or so many hours in a day. And so our research has shown that just the process of making that stuff conscious, being aware of it, like, oh yeah, when I'm with my kids, I'm really trying to make sure that they get all their homework done or that they're safe or something like that. Like, okay, am I doing that in a reasonable proportion? Is that a good fit for this moment? Do I want to set some of that aside? Or do I want to keep it exactly the way it is? There's something very therapeutic simply about the act of looking. And a lot of our treatment research has been to find ways to help people simply to look. What kind of person am I trying to be? Is that a good match for the situation I'm in? If it is, how can I do a great job of it? If it's not, how can I adjust it and titrate it? So that's the kind of self-care that to us is really important on top of all of the things that People's Pharmacy listeners would be already doing.
Now, Dr. Strauman, I'm wondering if you can illustrate that with perhaps a story of someone you have spoken with or seen recently.
Sure. So one example is, I'm at Duke University, and it's an especially difficult time to be a college student right now, certainly more so than I ever would have anticipated. And when I'm interacting with students that I advise or interacting with people as a therapist, what I'm finding is that people come to college with a set of expectations. They're going to do great in their classes. They're going to make lots of friends. They're going to be involved in 57 extracurricular activities. And all of that has been just brought to a halt abruptly. And it leaves people very ungrounded. I'm talking about somebody in particular who their experience is that I said, I came back to Durham to go to the university thinking I was going to be with my friends. I never see my friends. I'm in this apartment by myself. I know I don't want to be back at home with my parents because it would be hard to be a student there. But I hate the fact that I'm here in this apartment by myself, even though my friends are, live a half a mile away. And I haven't set foot on campus in months. I'm barely seeing any other people. So you're talking about conditions that are really conditions of deprivation. And so what this person and I have been working on is reframing, what can my goals be right now? What's a reasonable set of goals right now? 57 extracurricular activities, not a reasonable set of goals. One or two that you can maintain virtually, a great set of goals. Maintaining contact with people, thinking about in your classes, how much do you want to worry about grades versus do you want to worry about successfully completing the semester? And, grades will land where they land. It's also, I think, the case that a lot of my colleagues, the faculty people at the university, the staff people at the university, suddenly were being asked to do things we have no training in. One day, my courses went from in-person to virtual. I had never done a virtual course in my life, and I felt ridiculous. So, I'm talking about self-care. I'm trying to get myself to set reasonable expectations too.
Yes, and it is so difficult to all of a sudden be trying to do something in a way that you've never done before and haven't had any preparation.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I have a job and I'm very grateful for it. And, my life has been blessed in a lot of ways. But I mean, that's a small example of what many people are struggling with is, it's like the rug got pulled out from under us. What we were doing, what we may have been doing for the past 10 or 20 years, we wake up one day and the world is just not that way anymore. That's incredibly disruptive. And it takes time to sort that through and say, what are my priorities going to be? What's the most important thing for me, for my family? How do I give my life a sense of meaningfulness through all of this? And how do I sort of preserve the things that are most valuable to me?
Dr. Strauman, as we wrap up our conversation with you today, I suspect that a lot of our listeners are feeling out of control. There's a lot of uncertainty in their world. And, the old rules have kind of disappeared. What is your recommendation for the next several months and the next couple of years as we have to deal with this unpredictability?
Boy, great question. The first thing I would say is learn what you can control and what you can't control, and put your efforts into controlling what you can control. And it doesn't have to be a lot. It can be how you take care of yourself. It can be how you connect with the people you love. Any connection is a good one. And I think the other thing is be willing to be surprised. The world is changing. We don't know. It's a pretty safe bet it's not going to go back to exactly the way it was. Be willing to be surprised and to consider new possibilities as they emerge. Our society is a collection of really good people. I mean, Americans are strong, Americans are resilient, Americans are caring. We will get through this, but we're going to have to be open to new possibilities. And sometimes we just have to remind ourselves that the fact that it isn't going to be the way it was doesn't mean it isn't going to be better, and doesn't mean it isn't going to be with new opportunities that can, allow us to be the people we want to be going forward.
Dr. Timothy Strauman, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
Thank you so much for having me.
You've been listening to Dr. Timothy Strauman, a professor of psychology and neuroscience at Duke University. He studies the psychological and neurobiological aspects of self-regulation and how problems in self-regulation can lead to disorders such as depression. He also studies how treatments for depression work.
We spoke earlier with Dr. Robin Gurwitch. She's a professor in psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Duke University Medical Center and the Center for Child and Family Health.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Al Wodarski engineered. Dave Graydon edits our interviews. B.J. Liederman composed our theme music.
The People's Pharmacy is a co-production of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Verazana, an analytical laboratory providing home health tests for hormones, gut health, and the microbiome. Online at verisana.com, now with a monthly health club plan.
And by CocoVia, offering plant-based nutrients in the form of cocoflavanols for brain and heart health. Online at cocovia.com.
To buy a CD of today's show or any other People's Pharmacy episode, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 1238. That number again, 800-732-2334, on the web at peoplespharmacy.com.
When you visit our website, you can share your thoughts about today's show. You can subscribe to our podcast through your favorite podcast provider. We post it on the website every Monday morning.
At our website, you can sign up for our free online newsletter to get the latest news about COVID-19 and other important health stories. In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thanks for listening. Please join us again next week. Thank you for listening to the People's Pharmacy Podcast. It's an honor and a pleasure to bring you our award-winning program week in and week out. But producing and distributing this show as a free podcast takes time and costs money.
If you like what we do and you'd like to help us continue to produce high-quality, independent healthcare journalism, please consider chipping in.
All you have to do is go to peoplespharmacy.com/donate.
Whether it's just one time or a monthly donation, you can be part of the team that makes this show possible. Thank you for your continued loyalty and support. We couldn't make our show without you.